three panelists. Sorry, we are recording this session. I'm sorry I didn't warn you before, so that we can have, for those that could not be present today, they will still be able to access all this content. And I will also like to note that the content from other web conferences on diversity and inclusion are available at the ILGLAW website. So immediately to the session, we will start with the presentation of the first panelist. And we will have addressing us today, Lucie Palesi is a PhD candidate at Université Paris-Saclay, working under the supervision of Anne Wuon. At the crossroads of science studies, sociology of sport, gender, and queer studies, their PhD thesis deals with transgender people in competitive sport. They are also an activist in several French LGBTIQ+ and feminist organizations. So, Lucie, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and thank you for this opportunity to talk to you about a topic which is obviously something very important to me. So yeah, just 1 second. I move the other screens. Okay, so sorry in advance, my presentation will probably be a little bit dense, but I will try to make it simple and understandable for everyone. So chosen to make a little bit of broader presentation than only sexual orientations, and I will talk to you about all marginalized gender identities and sexual orientations, and also I should have had in my title also intersex variations. And so I will try to the European Union context and some elements about the specific context of universities. So here is the different parts of my presentation. So first of all, since not everyone is necessarily aware of all the terms, I will start with some definitions. So what is LGBTIQ+ acronym? It's an acronym to that means L for lesbians, G for gay, B for bisexual, T for trans or transgender, I for intersex, Q for queer, and plus allows us to include other kind of identities, sexual orientation, etc., such as pansexual, asexual, non-binary, queer, etc. Then, according to me, there are three kinds of areas we should be aware of. First, everything that's around sex. So according to me, sex is a list of biological markers, which are primary and secondary sex characteristics, chromosomes, hormones, genitals, hairiness, chest, etc., that have traditionally been classified in our Western societies into mutually exclusive categories, male and female. And so it's not a natural category. Other societies can have other categories, and there is also an history and social reasons for this today definition of sex. Then there is the assigned sex at birth, which is a sex marker written on legal documents, and it's in general based on external genitals observation at birth. And it's a word usually used in transgender communities, and we will see that just after. And when we talk about sex, here we have intersex people. We are people born with sex characteristics that don't match the stereotypical and normative definitions of male and female. So they can have variations on all the primary and secondary sex characteristics I mentioned above, chromosomes, hormones, etc. And what is really important to know is that intersex people can be men, can be women, can be non-binary. They receive an assigned sex at birth, male or female, and so they can also be cisgender or transgender. So we have to distinguish from these different categories, and sometimes people think that intersex people equals non-binary people, and that's not the case at all. Many intersex people are men or women and feel like men or women. Second category of vocabulary I want to develop is gender. So gender is two things. First, people's internal perceptions and experience of maleness and femaleness. And from a social sciences perspective, it is also the social constructions that considers some behaviors as masculine and some other behaviors as feminine. And it is some kind of a power relationship in society. Then we have gender expression, which is people's manifestation of their gender. Gender identity, which is the intimate and personal experience of the lived gender, and it's independent from biological characteristics. And I could add that it is also independent from gender expression. And here we have trans or transgender people, the antonym being cisgender people, who are people whose gender differ from their assigned sex or assigned gender at birth. And in the past, we used transsexual or transsexualism, but today this word tend to be abandoned for many reasons. I won't enter in the details here, but just know that you shouldn't use those words. The transgender community is a wide community, and we could say it is some kind of an umbrella. And so among transgender people, we have transgender men, who are men who were assigned female at birth, but identify and are male. Transgender women, who are women who were assigned male at birth, but identify and are female. And we have another umbrella term, which is non-binary people, who are people who don't identify as strictly male or strictly female. And there are a lot of different identities among the non-binary community, for example, agender people, gender fluid, etc. And an important thing also to know is that trans and non-binary people don't necessarily follow a social transition, which is saying to everyone, you are trans and you don't identify with the sex you were assigned at birth, etc. They don't necessarily follow a medical transition. Some people want to take hormones and or want to make some surgeries, but others don't want to do everything that's medically possible. And not everyone do a legal transition, which is changing your gender marker on your legal documents. And last area is sexual orientation, which is the affective, emotional, and sexual attraction someone can experience toward other individuals. And in our societies, we tend to classify these orientations according to the gender of the potential partners. And so there are a lot of possible sexual orientations: heterosexual, homosexual, lesbian or gay, bisexual or pansexual, asexual, who are people who don't necessarily feel the need to have sexual partners, and more, etc. So I've gathered some data on LGBTIQ population in the European Union to give you an idea of this European context. So I'm using the EU LGBTI second survey made by the European Union Agency for Fundamental Rights, and was, as you can see, a lot of respondents, 1,400 respondents. All it concerns all EU countries, plus Serbia and Macedonia, which are EU candidates. It was an online survey, and it covers many areas of LGBTI life: discrimination, harassment, violence, right awareness, being open about the fact that you are LGBTI, the experience in different areas of life, such as work or education, socioeconomic living conditions, health, well-being, housing conditions. So some main results. The first one is that, and it's not a surprise, of course, but LGBTI population suffers a lot of discrimination and violence. So as you can see on this figure, 42% of LGBTI people felt discriminated against in the 12 months before the survey. So LGBTI respondents are the blue line. Moreover, most LGBTI people said that they experienced over the past 5 years harassment, and which is in this survey defined as offensive or threatening situations at work, on the street, on public transport, in a shop, on the internet, or anywhere else, including offensive or threatening incidents of a sexual nature. And last figure is that 1 in 10 people said that they had been physically or sexually attacked in the past 5 years. What is also striking in this figure is that in all conditions for discrimination, harassment, physical or sexual attacks, trans and intersex respondents suffer more than others this kind of violence. So as you can see, the gray lines and orange lines are always higher than the blue one. This violent and discriminatory environment leads LGBTI people to try to protect themselves in the public space. And basically, most of them try to hide themselves. So a majority of respondents always or often avoids simple display of affection in public, such as holding hands. So same-sex couples tend to avoid sharing forms of affection in public. And also 1 in 3 respondents often or always avoid certain places for fear of being assaulted, threatened, or harassed. So it has real consequences on the capacity for LGBTI people to access public spaces. Another important result regarding school and education, which are areas that can be interesting for us as members of universities and high education school. And so 1 question was, during your time at school, have you heard or seen anyone support, protect, or promote the rights of LGBTI people? And so this figure shows that LGBTI issues are gradually being addressed more in school and in a more positive way. So if you look at the first line, which represents the youngest respondents of the survey, which were 15 to 17 when the survey was done, they tend to, the majority of them tend to say that they always or often heard or seen anyone support, protect, etc. the right of LGBTI people, while the older ones, over 40 or 55, most of them, almost all of them, rarely or never experience such thing in school. Moreover, in this education context, younger respondents who were at school in the recent past, they more frequently experience positive support and protection during their time at school than respondents who went to school long ago. So the situation is improving. Nevertheless, school remains a place of discrimination, since we see that half of respondents aged 15 to 17 have experienced discrimination in their life, so not necessarily at school, but in their life. And among them, among the ones who experienced discrimination, half felt discriminated against at school. So school can be like an ambivalent place where you can express your LGBTI identity, but at the same time, sometimes suffer discrimination. I wanted also to stress some intersex data, since in Europe there are not many statistical data on intersex people, and actually it's also a world issue. we don't have a lot of intersex data, and especially we don't have a lot of intersex data on medical treatments or surgeries performed on intersex children. Because what is really important to know and to become aware of regarding intersex people is that in Europe and in most parts of the world, they suffer grave violations of their right to physical and psychological integrity, since they medical staff tend to perform on them surgeries and treatments without their consent. So they tend to make surgeries on babies, on young children, not saying all the information to the parents and to the patients themselves, and sometimes not asking, and most of the times not asking for informed consent from these people. So basically, for example, France has been condemned several times by the United Nations for not condemning these mutilations which take place in France today. Very few member states in the EU explicitly prohibit those medical interventions on intersex people without consent. Malta was the first country to create a law around it. And today, Portugal and Germany have also, maybe not fully in place, but they have new policies which tend to condemn this. And last thing regarding this European survey is that, of course, we see a lot of differences across countries. If we look at discrimination, physical and sexual violences, and also harassment, of course, obviously, some countries tend to have higher rates of discrimination or violence than others. And to take one example, which is discrimination, in Sweden, LGBTI people declared they were discriminated against at a rate of 32%, so 1/3, while in Hungary, almost half of them declared having been discriminated against in the past 5 years. There is also wide variations about the perception of intolerance and prejudice. For example, in Portugal, Sweden, Germany, more than 45% of respondents perceive a decrease in intolerance and prejudice towards LGBTI people, while in the reverse in Hungary and France, where more than 40% of respondents perceive an increase. And last element that vary from country to country is the openness about being LGBTI. Of course, since the contexts are different, people tend to be more open in some countries than others. And so, for example, in Sweden, Germany, or France, people tend to be much more open about being LGBTI than in Portugal or above all in Hungary, where not that many people tend to be out. So some legal aspects and values in the European Union, which give also other elements of context. So first, there is kind of a fight against discrimination, which is the core basis of European values. So the European Union has founded itself around common values such as respect for human dignity, freedom, equality, solidarity, respect for human rights, freedom of expression, private and family life, principle of non-discrimination, and equality between men and women. And so these values have been translated in the European Union legal framework. For example, the European Union Charter of Fundamental Rights or the Treaty on the Functioning of the EU. In both these texts, we have sexual orientation, which is explicitly included, while gender identity and sex characteristics are not explicitly mentioned. And there are also other broader legal framework, which can also be used to defend LGBT rights in Europe. For example, the European Convention of Human Rights and the jurisprudence from European Court of Human Rights. So this is the broad legal framework, but we have also a wide range of national legislations, so many differences, again, between European countries. So some national legislation can create specific legal context on LGBT rights, which goes from hostility. For example, Hungary today, also Poland, have anti-LGBTIQ propaganda legislations, while other countries tend to have a more protective legal system. For example, France and Germany have anti-discrimination legislation covering sexual orientation and gender identity. Portugal also has anti-discrimination legislation covering variation in sex characteristics. And the last part on the slide after, so just 3 minutes just after. So on other topics which are specific to national context, we have the same-sex marriage and family. And so half European countries allow same-sex couple to marry. 21 countries offer alternative form of civil registrations, but also some countries in Europe do not provide a legal status for same-sex couple, such as Poland. And we have also differences among EU members regarding adoption and access to assisted reproduction. And last element, which depends from the countries, is the legal gender recognition. So the possibility, especially for transgender people, to change their name or their gender marker on their legal documents. And so some countries allow LGR without self-determination, which means that people have to prove in a certain way, sometimes with medical evidence, sometimes with for example, in France, you have to provide letters from your parents or friends saying that indeed you live in your daily life as the person you claim to be. You need to show other legal papers using your current name, etc., to access this legal gender recognition. Some countries allow this LGR with self-determination, which is people don't have to prove anything. They just say who they are, and it's possible for them to change their gender. But it's only for people over 16. And some countries allow this LGR with self-determination also for minor people. It's the case of Luxembourg and Malta, for example. And some countries don't allow this change. It's the case of Hungary. And what I told you before about some countries having a third gender marker, such as Germany. So some countries recognize some form of non-binary identities. So to end my presentation, I will give you a quick insight on the French National Survey on LGBTI students' well-being, which is called in French Bien-être des étudiants LGBT. So the acronym of this survey is BEL. Which was conducted by 2 French students' organizations, CAELIF, and then became an independent organization, Eclair, devoted to this survey. It was a national online survey on French LGBTIQ students' well-being, conducted in 2018, and we are still analyzing the data. And to my knowledge, it's the biggest, more than 6,000 respondents from LGBTI people. And so it was around the well-being of students, health, sexual health, violence and discrimination, and socio-demographic informations. So some quick results, which basically confirm what I said about the broader context in Europe. Half of LGBTI students suffered violence during their studies, and it is twice as much as non-LGBTI students we had in the study. So in blue, is the data from LGBTI students. And if we look at trans students, they suffer even more violence, since 2/3 of them declared having suffered violence during their studies. So they develop strategies to protect themselves. And we can see that in universities, 1/3 of LGBT plus students, so students with non-heterosexual orientations, they tend to hide their sexual orientation in their studies. Regarding gender identity / being trans, 40% of trans students hide their gender identity. And if we look more specifically at non-binary students, it's half of them who hide their gender identity. And another important figure in the study was the fact that 15%, which is quite important, of trans students have already given up a course by fear of suffering violence, and 1/4 have already thought about giving up a course. And all that also have consequences on mental health of the LGBTI students population. And we can see that during the last month, 80% have been stressed, 60% have been depressed, and what was really shocking, 1/4 have had suicidal thoughts. And if we look specifically at trans students, half of trans students during the last month had suicidal thoughts. So to conclude, just some resources I relied on to make this presentation, and you can also turn to if you want more information. So the EU Lgbti survey, so the second one, because they made the first one in 2013, if I remember well, and so this is the one from last year. The survey I participated to, Bien-être des étudiants LGBTI+, so it's in French, but if you can read French, we are trying to publish the results very soon. Also, if you are interested in education data in Europe, you have the LGBTQI Inclusive Education Report and Index 2022, made by the International Lesbian, Gay, Bisexual, Transgender, Queer, and Intersex Youth and Student Organization. So all of these documents give a lot of data on the European context. You can also look at what the European Parliament's LGBTI intergroup do, if you want to be aware of their activities and what's going on in European Parliament on these issues. And then you have many European organizations fighting for the rights of LGBTI+ people. ILGA Europe, which is a huge organization about LGBTI issues. Organization Intersex International Europe for intersex people, Transgender Europe for transgender people, the European Lesbian Conference for lesbians, and if you're interested in families stuff, you have NELFA, Network of European LGBTIQ Families Associations. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. That was a really great presentation with a lot of data, a lot of food for thought, where I'm sure we all have a lot of questions. And please let me remind you that there is a possibility for you to pose some questions on Q&A. If you want to use it right now, you can do it. We will answer the questions later on at the end of the session after all the panelists have made their presentations. And now I will give the floor to both my colleagues Isabella and Catherine. We are going to listen to the voices of our community when we ask them questions on the subject. So I will pass on to my colleagues. Isabella?
Yes, hello everyone. It's nice to see you here. We actually have a question that we would like you to answer. So I will post it here in the chat. And there's a link. And it's a little bit to see how much we know about this topic. I'm sure after Lucy's presentation, we know a lot more. But if you enter the link, you can see that the question is, do you know what is meant by sexual orientation? And you have the options, yes, I do, no, I don't, or I think I do, but I'm not completely sure. So we will give you a few minutes to answer this question. Okay, so I can share the results with you. Actually, 69% have answered, yes, I do. No one has responded, no, I don't. And 31% have answered, I think I do, but I'm not completely sure. And so after this first poll, we're going to watch and listen to a video where we have interviewed some students also about this topic.
What pops up in my mind is what I've been taught as a child, that there are two genders, a male and a female. So that's it for me, sexual orientation. Yeah.
It's a scientific term, but for me, it means something very natural. I don't understand why it's always a problem.
What comes to my mind is freedom, love, acceptance of yourself and of what makes you happy. And yeah, that can happen in all different dimensions, I think. On an individual one, on a collective one.
I don't have so much information to say what it's about. I hear so much about it, but I just don't know.
I'm not really sure about it, but for me it's just how people can feel in their body and how they want to be seen and accepted. So as female, male, or neither of this.
It's really simple. It means love for me. It can be either physical or like mental love. So it doesn't matter who you love. For me, the important thing is that you love someone or you love something in someone.
I think sexual orientation is difficult nowadays in the way that, on the one hand, I would say people need to be aware that sexual orientation is a spectrum in a certain way, and that there is different opportunity or different ways you can express your own sexual orientation. But on the other hand, I think it's also something that is over-exaggerated in a way that we shouldn't emphasize on it that much. It's something that is part of your identity, and it shouldn't be a big deal for others to accept that. And if you have a sexual orientation that differs from the ones that we have accepted already, then you should be able to just be accepted and focus on your life, focus on the other things that you want to do and that you want to be.
It is a vast and complex subject. Technically, it is a word to say who you are attracted to, which sex as the origin, but today you have to extend it to which gender you are attracted to. You may be attracted to men, women, cisgendered, transgendered. It is a really large and complex question. And today you may add a political sense, because there is a sense of militantism in the way you describe yourself. It depends on the letter of the LGBTQ IAP plus you define yourself. There is a lot of militantism behind.
Yes, thank you for that first video. We could see a lot of different inputs and opinions from both staff and students from all of the 5 UCLA universities. We have a second question for you, so it's the same procedure. I will post the link here in the chat, and that will bring you to the second question, and I will give you a few minutes to answer it. And the question is, which one of the following options do you think is the most important one to contribute to reduce prejudice based on someone's sexual orientation? And you have the 3 options: through formal education, through policies, or by creating discussions and creating awareness outside of formal education. Okay, so it looks like everyone has voted, and 63% has voted through formal education, and 37% have voted by creating discussions and creating awareness outside the formal education. So now we'll show you a second video with the next question that we asked our UGLO staff and students.
I think that I'm open to everyone. If they have a problem or they feel that they were prejudiced before, they can talk to me and I can help them maybe, or maybe find others to help them.
What comes to my mind here is awareness. Spread awareness, be mindful of your own activities, be mindful of how your own words, your own actions might be for other people, might seem to other people. And then I think inclusiveness is a very big word here to mention as well, that you should always include people however interested they are, however, whatever they may love and whatever makes them happy. You should try to be mindful, aware of other people's interests, and then try to be as inclusive as you can.
Nowadays, sexual orientation has become a very delicate word, and I think even as at yet, I'm not sure if there's an agreed definition for sexual orientation as at now. There are a lot of talks about it, and in my part of the world, it's something that we are still struggling about. We politically, culturally, traditionally, there are still so many talks in my part of the world, and I think the whole world has a long way to go when it comes to the word sexual orientation. We shouldn't just forget about it. We should continue talking about it till we all come to an agreement.
In the faculty where I work, there is a student association who works on it and who is very active. Yeah, we disseminate the documentation, the information they want to share with the other students.
I try to be really careful. For example, when I take care of the signing of the libraries, so I try not to put stereotypes on the doors for using the bathroom. I think maybe we can do something with the library catalog when we register new users of the libraries. Maybe we can also just register the person as she wants to be registered, but it's not that often.
So there's a few things. One, I am open to anything and anyone that people feel or are or express. And in my work as well, supporting the learning management system of the university, we try to give the people that don't identify with a certain gender the opportunity to identify the way that they want to be identified as.
I think you need to educate people. It's really important.
Thank you so much. I think it would be great if we could get maybe a comment from our speakers on these videos at the end of the session when we do the Q&A. We have one more poll and one more video left for this session. So I will do the same, that I will post the link here. And the final question is, have you experienced or witnessed prejudice due to your or someone else's sexual orientations? And the answer options are, I have experienced it, I have witnessed it, I have both witnessed and experienced it, or I have not experienced or witnessed it. So you're welcome to cast your vote. Okay, so here we have a quite mixed result, I would say. 26% say that they have experienced it, 13% say that they have witnessed it, and 50% say that they have both witnessed it and experienced it, and 11% have not experienced or witnessed it. So it's definitely a majority of us here today who have witnessed or experienced this. This was the last poll. And I said that it would be great to have a comment from our speakers at the end, what they think about this. But we have one more video to watch, so I will give the floor to Catherine to display that one.
Not so much, I would say. And like I said, like I don't have so much information to, like a feedback to know this and that.
I think I've witnessed prejudices around sexual orientation quite a lot. There's different ways that they can be witnessed, for example, in language. For example, in schools, children use different words quite harmfully, and they give words negative connotations, even though they may not actually or should not actually convey something negative. Also, I think what is very important here is also that there can be cultural differences in prejudice, for example, in how prejudices are lived. Different cultures use different things to show prejudice. For example, I witnessed it in form of language in Germany. I witnessed it in kind of avoidance of people altogether in Japan. So in different cultures, prejudices can be different, but as harmful. So yes.
I'm not sure if I've experienced or witnessed prejudice because I myself, I identify as a heterogenic male, and I am not sure that I would see sexual prejudice, but I would say that for people that struggle with their sexual orientation, it is already a struggle when they are forced to identify a male or a female within bureaucratic processes. And that is something that I do recognize as, well, maybe not prejudice, but an issue.
Personally, no, I have not experienced anything of that sort.
No, I haven't.
At University Paris-Saclay, never.
I haven't witnessed prejudices in my university.
So thank you, Isabel, Catherine. This is really, for me, it was really surprising and so interesting how young people are more and more aware of this subject and all that it implies. So we shall continue with our program. Now I will immediately after my presentation of our next panelist, I will give the floor. So what we have next is Sorcha Hughes, is a student in social studies of gender master's program at Lund University. After studying international relations at the bachelor level, Sorcha's main interests academically are gender politics, particularly understanding the exclusionary feminism phenomena, as well as gender relations in post-conflict Northern Ireland. Sorcha has been a part of Project Sex, I'm not sure I'm pronouncing it correctly, for the past semester and enjoys the community-based aspects of their work. Thank you for being with us today, and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much for that kind introduction. I will just get my slide prepared. Everything visible and yep, is it okay?
Yes.
Yes.
Great. So yes, as said, my name is Sorcha Hughes. I come from Northern Ireland, and I'm studying here in Sweden. And I'm also part of P6, Project Sex. You pronounced it perfectly, Alice. So I will just go ahead and get started with a little bit of information about our values and history. So Project Sex is an independent student organization that works for Lund University students. So it's entirely student-led, from our chairperson to the officers that work to create events, to the people who advertise and market events, and to look after our funding and spending. Our core aim is to promote sexual health on a physical, emotional, and social level. So in other words, we really aim to destigmatize discussions of sexual health, safe sexual practice, and in turn educating students about the beautiful and complicated reality of sexual identity, desire, and behaviors. What many students here in Lund know us for is being present at student events to hand out free condoms and lube, and to help students to learn where they can go to access screening for sexually transmitted infections, as this is not a service that we provide. We are able to do this so successfully because we are also partnered with RFSU, which is Swedish is not my strong point, but it is Riksförbundet för sexuell upsilning. And since 2020, we have been official partners with RFSU Malmö, which is one of RFSU's oldest local associations. And I just want to read a small quote from the RFSU Malmö website, which reads, "Together we pursue commitment based on the conviction of the central role of sexuality for the individual and society." So this really speaks to the importance of the work that P6 and more broadly RFSU conduct. There are links to policy issues, governmental decision-making, and advocacy for marginalized groups. So we here at P6 really recognize the crucial nature of bringing these conversations to students, to work actively to deconstruct boundaries that have become quite pervasive regarding who or what is normal or acceptable. As our organization developed, in the beginnings, we integrated with the Gay Students Alliance, so we have much more of an active presence in LGBTQ+ specific education and events, which is part of the section of P6 that I am part of. So then I just wanted to talk you through a little bit of what we do, some of our initiatives, events this year. The first here, you can see movie screening for Miss Major. For those of you who don't know, Miss Major is a trans woman activist and a community leader for transgender rights, with a particular focus on the rights of women of color. She has worked for a long time to assist transgender people who are disproportionately incarcerated in the prison industrial complex. We've also had, as you can see, a queer crafting workshop. Some of it, the art that I made, the crafting workshop is actually on my wall. So we just got together to craft, listen to music, have community. I'll talk a lot more about community in a moment. And then on queer love and sexuality, a sex toy talk was a wonderful evening where we kind of destigmatized, what might be quite a taboo topic for many people. It was a very judgment-free space. Lots of toys to look at, and we had a great knowledgeable student who came to teach us all about different sex toys and the things that you can do with them. So I'm sure from this description you can get an idea of what motivates us to organize our events. A key aspect for us is building community and spaces that are safe and that people feel comfortable coming to. So there are no hierarchies between, whether you're out of the closet or not, whether you have sex or not, whether you're knowledgeable in these areas or not. We can come together to learn and to socialize with people who belong to the same community as you. And this has massive advantages for individuals' mental health, as well as gaining skills and knowledge to be confident with their physical sexual health. So the conceptualization of community space is a location where individuals who are connected in a particular way can meet, bond, resist oppression, or find a shared sense of connection. This is so important because of the disciplinary and oftentimes restrictive nature of a cis-normative and heteronormative world. And so what I mean by some of those big words I just used is disciplinary means that there are rules, often unspoken, that within society we are expected to abide by in order to be valid members of this society. So we could call these norms, and these norms are heteronormative, meaning that they assume heterosexuality and I would say many, if not all, aspects of life, social, political, economic, they're all built around these heteronormative premises. So living outside of these unspoken rules as queer people, trans people, intersex people, it has an effect on you. This effect could be outright homophobia, transphobia, violence. Lucy, as we heard wonderfully earlier on, had a lot of data in this regard. Or it could be something subtle, such as being misgendered in the classroom. And these things can be exhausting and hard to constantly resist. So then the importance of being able to exist in a space comfortably and without judgment cannot be overstated. Additionally, we just wouldn't be able to do the work that we do without first putting time and effort into the building of community. Lund has a massive student population, as I'm sure most of you are aware. And this means that students come from vastly different backgrounds with different cultural understandings of sexual health and identity. So for some, this might be their first chance to meet other people their age and to be together in an environment where they can learn important things, but also feel like they belong and are safe and accepted. And of course, in order to do this, oh, sorry, I should have had that slide up before. In order to do this, we must be trained to do so. So P6's peer education method is how we ensure that peers educate peers, of which the benefits I've mentioned already. However, in order for us to be able to educate our peers, we have in-depth training of new officers after an interview process, and I can attest to the level and the quality of the group integration and introductions. So we had a basic education weekend, which the title, Don't Be Fooled by Basic Education. It contained very in-depth presentations and discussions on areas of LGBTQ+ health, sexual health, and more. I'll just give you a little highlight from some of these. An introduction to BDSM and kink. So we learned about different types of kinks, the reasons that people engage in kink behavior, exploring aspects of themselves, and even healing from trauma or difficult processes. And how to engage safely in kink, such as learning the ways that the kink community tries to ensure safe practice, such as the motto safe, sane, and consensual, and with systems such as risk-aware consensual kink. In our asexuality introduction, asexuality and aromanticism, we really got to expand our knowledge about the asexual and aromantic community, also called ASPEC. So we learned that ASPEC doesn't really say anything about how a person feels about sex or romance. Really, there are different terms such as sex favorable, sex neutral, or sex repulsed. And these things really help us to break down the assumptions that many people have of the asexual or aromantic community. So then I want to move on to talk a little bit about why our work is important. And I'll start first on the local level and then talk a little bit more broadly about Sweden. And then I think that's everything I have for you today. So on the local level, Lund, the city of Lund has no explicitly queer spaces for people to gather or an official space which caters for the needs of queer people in Lund on a physical, social, or emotional level. And further, within Lund University, as queer trans students ourselves, we see a lack of development in this regard. Bureaucratically, being a trans person at Lund University is quite an arduous thing, and structural change is slow. Basic needs such as changing of your name on official registers, Canvas, etc., it's nearly impossible. And the issue that I have with this is that there is a lot of onus put on trans and queer students to have to be loud and to have to fight for their rights and their needs to be recognised. However, this is inherently problematic because, as I mentioned earlier, it is a tiring thing for LGBTQ+ people to have to do. And in institutions such as Lund University, we should hope that these are things that could be offered to students rather than them having to demand it. So this, impacts the social and psychological experiences of university life for queer students, and it creates a disparity that is unjust. So this is why I've discussed the need for community so explicitly. As one of the things that we try to do with the range and the frequency of our events is to bring community to students, offer them a space rather than them having to search it out. On a more national level and even international, we have a wide range of perspectives here. And I'm sure that we are all aware of the discrepancies that exist in the area of sexual rights. Once again, Lucy's presentation was a great point of reference for that comment. So I would say that despite its global image as a progressive nation, Sweden is not really without its issues. It definitely has a reputation as being a haven for LGBTQ+ rights. And here we certainly do have many laws that promote and protect the rights of LGBTQ+ people. For example, marriage equality laws, possibility for trans people to medically and legally transition. However, we must also recognize that this leaves non-binary and possibly intersex as well identities in a grey area. And Sweden also has laws that forbid discrimination based on sexual orientation, gender identity, and gender expression. Although this is not to say that LGBTQ+ people do not face struggles. We have some recent research that shows that LGBTQ plus people face violence and harassment because of their identities to a much greater extent than people who abide by societal norms of sexuality, gender identity, and expression. This is also true when it comes to mental health. Research shows that lesbian, gay, and bisexual individuals are affected by mental health issues at twice the rate of heterosexual people. Trans people especially are at a risk of facing violence, discrimination, and harassment, and issues with mental health. A shocking statistic, as once again Lucy also mentioned, is that 1 out of 4 trans people are estimated to have contemplated taking their own lives, which is, as I said, a real and devastating statistic. So these are just some of the examples of the issues that LGBTQ plus people face in Sweden and that need to be addressed for their health and well-being. And just another reason why P6 and the LGBTQ plus initiatives exist, and why we also try to bring, positive events. We have some serious events where we talk about real issues that affect our lives, and then we also can create spaces for people to come and be soft and relaxed together. So we see ourselves not just as part of an insular student community, but we have the capability to create real change for students alongside RFSU, the wider community. So thank you very much. Thank you for listening, and I believe we'll have questions at the end, and our email is here if you ever want to reach out, have some information, or just a chat. Thank you.
Thank you so much. It was really interesting, some really tragic in a way information, but also some hopeful and interesting ideas on how to build a community. Thank you so much for your contribution. And I remind you that you will keep on having access to all this content later on in our UGLO site, because this is being recorded. So you can go back to this and profit from all these ideas, all these interesting thoughts that we are sharing here today. So let's continue with the presentations and go quickly to our next panelist. Jorge Gato is a researcher in the Center of Psychology at the University of Porto, with an interest in the lives of LGBTQ plus individuals in different contexts, such as school, family, and work. He is an advocate for LGBTQ plus human rights. So, Jorge, thank you for being here today, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Elise. Hello, everyone. It is a pleasure to be here in this day that we celebrate the removal of homosexuality from the list of diseases of the World Health Organization. We also celebrate in Portugal 40 years of the decriminalization of homosexuality in 1982. So this is a big day. I'm going to share a presentation. Okay. And my proposal for today is to talk a little bit about sexual and gender diversity in the Faculty of Psychology and Education Sciences of the University of Porto, and what can organizations such as universities do to promote the well-being of their LGBTQ plus members. I'm going to tell you a little bit about the situation in Portugal. Of course, these are very fresh data from the Rainbow Map by ILGA Europe of 2022. So Portugal is in a quite good situation concerning legal aspects. So we have made an important progress concerning laws. So we are a fairly equal country in terms of laws, but when we ask LGBTQ people about their situation, the picture changes a little bit. So Lucy has already told us about some data about the European Union Agency survey, the last survey in 2020. For Portugal, these numbers are quite worrying. For instance, 30% of the surveyed LGBTQ people in Portugal had been arrested due to their sexual orientation in the previous year. 1 in 5 did not report these attacks to the police for fear of homophobic attitudes. And this is a quite important piece of data. 6 out of 10 people never or rarely hold hands with their same-sex partner in public due to fear of harassment, and 65% never or rarely expose their LGBTQ+ identity. So we have here, you can see some sort of a paradox. We have very good laws in Portugal, but we have a situation of invisibility regarding LGBTQ people. So what can organizations do to promote the well-being of their LGBTQ members? And in these organizations, we can include universities. These are some recommendations of a study that we've been involved a few years ago. It's the ADIM study, advancing the management of LGBT diversity in the public and private sector. So some recommendations: first, to do a diagnostic assessment. What is going on in our organization regarding the well-being of the LGBTQ+ members. Second, to adopt specific policies taking into account the results of this diagnostic assessment. So to adopt specific policies of LGBTQ+ diversity and inclusion. To promote groups and networks of LGBTQ members and allies. To foster the visibility of LGBTQ identified members, to promote equality training sessions among members of the organization, and to attend to the diversity within the LGBTQ+ diversity, for instance, the needs of trans or non-binary employees, to have a communication strategy, and to stimulate, in the case of universities, to stimulate research with the LGBTQ+ population. And I am going to talk a little bit about these last two recommendations, to have a communication strategy, for instance, by celebrating the Heidehaut, which is happening at this right moment outside in the university. Every year we take a picture, as you can see in the image, outside the faculty. This is only one of the events. I'm missing it this year, but it's for a good reason. It's a pleasure to be here. We have been celebrating Heidehaut in the Faculty of Psychology and Education Sciences since 2018, so 4 years ago. We started slowly by only inviting people for this group picture. As you can see, this was our first event. In 2019, we advanced quite a lot, so we organized a series of events, a seminar, a poster presentation, a mini concert. We also had community organizations coming into the faculty, a cinema session, performances. But then in 2020, these are just some examples, some photos. In 2020 came the pandemic, and with lockdown restrictions in place, university went online. So in that year, we only had the rainbow banner and the text remembering the Heidehaut in the FPCUP webpage. Last year, the same. We had a second lockdown in Portugal, and we only had online events. We had a series of links in the webpage of the faculty. The picture was not live, the picture was online, so we invited people to take a picture and send the picture to us. And we did a collage and we posted it in the web page. The performance of the female choir of the faculty, and etc. etc. These events had some resonance in the news, as we can see here. And this year we celebrated again in presence, so we are very happy with that. We are taking the group photo right now. A colleague just came in to ask me to join them, but I just said no. And we are going to have an international seminar with the dissemination of the results of a study that we have conducted here. I'm going to tell you a little bit more about this study in a moment. And we are also having a poster session by our students that are going to present some results of their own research projects. So this is the second part of the presentation. So we should have a communication strategy. These days are to be celebrated, but also, of course, we are in a university. Research is a big part of university life. So to stimulate research with LGBTQ+ populations is certainly a goal of our institution. I belong to a research group here in the Faculty of Psychology. It's called the CND, the Culture, Normativity and Diversity Group, which addresses challenges to different social groups by examining gender equality, for instance, in the workplace, in the work-family balance, peer victimization, discrimination, ethnic prejudice, or resilience in sexual and gender minorities. We also have a very applied aspect of our research. So we tend to develop interventions aiming at promoting individual and social well-being. And we have been consulted several times on policy-making decisions in Portugal, for instance, regarding same-sex adoption laws. These are just a few examples of the work we conduct here in the faculty. My line of research specifically is about LGBTQ+ parenthood, adoption, gender, parenthood aspirations of the LGBTQ population. And more recently, we have been investing in knowing a little bit more about the climate for LGBTQ+ students in Portuguese schools. And today we are cover of one of the main newspapers in Portugal, Público, with the results of a study that we are going to disseminate today. So for those of you who don't understand Portuguese, I'm just going to translate you one of the main results that is in the cover of the newspaper. 4 out of 5 young LGBTQ students hide their sexual orientation and gender identity from their teachers. This is just one of the main results that we are going to present today. So about the future, how should we move on? How should we proceed in terms of communication? We are going to continue to celebrate IDHOT with scientific and art and social events. This is, of course, a celebration. We want to keep it scientific, but we also want to attract the community with art events and social events. Maybe in the future to extend the IDHOT to other UP, University of Porto departments, why not? The Students' Union has been having an increasing role in this celebration in the last few years. For instance, today we are going to have a party at the end of the seminar. And in terms of research, to continue the research line, exploring the lives of LGBTQ individuals from both a national and international perspective. So to infinity and beyond, the sky is the limit. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, George. It has been really incredible. I'm not sure if you're seeing me. Yeah, okay. It has been really interesting. One thing, now we come to the part of commenting and answering questions. And I just wanted to say this, it's really incredible that at our day and age, there are still human beings having to hide who they are, how to fear. That is an incredible data that came up in every presentation, and this is really shocking to me. But on the other hand, it's also from the statements of our students, of our community, and for all this interesting initiatives. It is really incredible how hard people have been fighting to move from that situation, how clear young people are seeing this issue. and just stating the basic and necessary things that we have to look at. Just life and diversity should be celebrated. That is incredible. So we have a lot of questions here. We have at least 9 questions. Let's see if we can go through them and you can comment on all this. And the first one is, do you think this is an intergenerational topic, or should the focus be on young people through formal education is one? And I'll just read 2, and then I'll give you the floor so that you can answer, all of you that have been our panelists today. And the second one is, I'm not sure how to ask about a person's pronoun, and I'm afraid of saying something wrong. How do I ask about a person's pronoun without offending the person? So this is the first 2 questions that I would like you to comment. Please feel free to...
I can comment on the second question quickly. I think I always say that offering your pronoun first is a really great way to start. You know, you meet a new person, you say, hi, my name is Sorcha, my pronouns are they, he, what are yours? You know, and that's, I cannot imagine a person that would offend, really. So I think it's a quite a foolproof way.
So we can always ask. That's no problem about that.
Yeah, and I just think that the concept of offering your pronoun first, you know, very much normalizes it. And I think, you know, a lot of people who aren't maybe more knowledgeable about trans and genderqueer identities might not think that a pronoun is important for them. You know, if they look they seem cisgendered, they think everyone will know that I am a woman. I don't need to offer my pronoun. But I think it's really important in kind of normalizing the use of pronouns. And so it's not just trans people and not just non-binary people who have to say, I am different, these are my pronouns. There are, you know, it's ways that we all get to know each other. So yeah, offering yours first, I think, is a great way to start.
Is anyone else wants to comment on these 2 questions?
I can read some informations about the first one. And yes, of course, this is an intergenerational topic, I think for several reasons. First, because old queer people also are the target of many discriminations and are often, not to say always, forgotten in public policies and even in our community about how do we deal with old trans people, old homosexual people who sometimes can't go to special houses for old people with their partner and stuff like that. So it's also something we should talk about. And I think also, of course, it affects everyone. And one of the questions was also, what can we do to have a better situation, etc. And one of the solutions is to have policies which tackles those questions. And who vote? Not just young people, everyone vote. So we need to have everyone aware of these topics to choose the right persons to have the right policies.
Mm-hmm. Yes, interesting. And let's move to another 2 questions. So the other one is, Lucy, you mentioned that 50% of trans students in the study answered that they left a course because of fear. What can we as universities do to support these students? And another one is, there are some worrying changes in some countries regarding LGBTI rights, such as the new law in the US limiting sexual education. You also see similar issues in other countries. What can we do to stop this? Do you want to comment on this, please?
The question was for Lucy?
No, it mentions Lucy.
Okay.
A data that Lucy presented, but not exactly for Lucy. Okay. So you can all comment if you like. This question is coming up all the time. What can we do? What can we do? How can we help? So maybe.
Maybe I can comment a little bit on that piece of data regarding the visibility. We have, in this study that I was telling you about, we have to draw a distinction here between laws and policies. For instance, the case of Portugal, we have very good laws in terms of education, sexual education, but then in terms of policies, how these laws are implemented, we have to go. We have still a long way to go. For instance, one of the results of this study was that almost half of the students haven't heard of LGBTQ plus issues in sex education classes. So they do have sex education. It's in the law that it should be mentioned, LGBTQ plus issues, but about half of them have never heard of these issues. So it's in the law, but it's not implemented. So we have food for thought here, and many things to do.
There is a lot of misinformation or disinformation even about this subject. Don't you think that this can contribute to the fact that this can become a prejudice, or that this is not being dealt with or explained or talked about because that people feel that they don't have information enough?
Mm-hmm. Yes, it certainly is a matter of fear when you don't know about other people, other communities. You fear them, right? So information is crucial, is essential. There's also the issue, sorry for talking about the study again, it's very present in my mind, that one of the backlashes against this type of studies is the issue of visibility. So people do ask, so why do we need to know LGBTQ students' sexual orientation or gender identity? So people ask these questions many times. For instance, myself, people say this, as a heterosexual person, I don't have to tell my teacher or my colleagues that I'm a heterosexual. And this is, of course, a mistake. Heterosexual and cisgender people are taken by default. They don't need to come out because everybody is perceived as heterosexual and cisgender until they do say that they are not heterosexual or cisgender. So this is a matter of visibility. Visibility is essential. LGBTQ people need to be visible and need to feel safe in their context to affirm their visibility. This is key. This is key.
Yeah. Important. Okay, let's move on with the other questions. Another one is, how can I, as a cis and heterosexual person, support this cause? And another one, thoughts on coming out. Question, there is an expectation that queer people should come out. Should you come out? Coming out can make you vulnerable to violence and discrimination. And another question for Sorsha. You talked about community. How important is it for LGBTQ plus to have a community? To my knowledge, there isn't any groups like Big Six in my city. Do you have any advice on how I can form my own LGBTQ plus community? This is a set of interesting questions, please. Sorsha, there was one for you particularly, so could you please?
Yes. Yes, I mean, I could talk about community all day, as you could probably guess from my presentation. I mean, from my own, I think it's because from my own personal experience as well, it's such a vital aspect of life and queer life. And I guess sometimes it can be hard to root out. I'm sure in whichever city you're from, I would imagine, you know, that there are some queer people around who would also like to get together. I think online spaces can also be a great way to start if you are a bit nervous about, you know, putting yourself out there in social spaces. I would maybe recommend looking for some, I mean, even here in Malmo, for example, well, not in Malmo, but, you know, close by, there's a queer bookstore that, you know, there's lots of kind of connections to community that can be built by maybe visiting these spaces. So it might not be something that, you know, screams community building, but if you can, you know, meet people, join a book club, I think there are great ways to do it. And I know it can be a bit scary to put yourself out there in many ways, but I feel in my experience it's always a worthwhile endeavor. And I think also maybe linking to the question about, you know, how I can be a cis and trans ally, you know, there's so many connections that you can make, and people, I think a lot of time people don't understand or maybe are not aware of how much the queer world can give them and how much queer community can give them. So, you know, you can build queer community with some close friends who maybe not identify as queer themselves, but I think, you know, this kind of allyship is very important. And whilst it's also obviously important to have your own spaces, yeah, social connection is a great way to go.
Any other comments you would like to?
I would just like to
make
a little comment regarding the coming out question. As a psychologist, of course, we know that coming out and visibility is associated to well-being and good mental health, but people should always assess first the environment and if they are safe, if they are doing their coming out in a safe space. That's my advice as a as a psychologist, of course, because sometimes it's better not to come out because people might be in danger if they do so. So it's always better to assess the resources, the community, etc., etc.
Yes, and reaching out to us in the institutions to stimulate us to create safe spaces. I think that's also very important. Continuing with questions, why are the abbreviations sometimes different? Lgbtq, Lgbtqi, Lgbtq, well, etc. Does it depend on language or another reason? And we have another question, which is a bit the same as others mentioned before. All of you have mentioned some very devastating data on violence and discrimination. How can we change this trend again? And another question for Jorge in particular. How should someone from countries like Portugal, where on paper and on superficial level are welcoming to LGBT plus people, but in reality, there is a lot of prejudice in disguise. On a different note, I'm from the University of Porto and I've never heard any LGBTQ plus events, and I find it hard to get in touch with the community. So please do comment on this, and especially us, I suppose.
I can answer the first question about abbreviations. There are several reasons why we use sometimes different abbreviations, and sometimes the same person also can use different abbreviation. Abbreviation was LGBT. But now we have also other identities and other sexual orientation, etc., which received labels, let's say, which could have existed before, but didn't have a strong label to rely on. And so now we have intersex people, who tend to be more and more visible today. And other I mentioned such as asexual people or non-binary people. Such identities can have existed during time, but not with this exact same experience than today. And today they have labels. And so we have added those words to the abbreviation to be more inclusive of everyone. And the plus is also a way to say it's also a community which is still in the form of construction and expanded, etc. And so today we call ourselves like that, but maybe tomorrow other form of identities and experiences can be added. And you probably also noticed sometimes we use queer as a synonym of LGBTIQ plus identities, but I don't know if you want a whole story about the queer term, but it used to be an insult addressed to LGBTI people, and it's a form of reappropriation from our community. So it tends to be used for more politicized people and LGBTI people who are aware of belonging to a community fighting for their rights, etc. So not everyone in the community or in LGBTI identities consider themselves being queer. For some people, being queer is kind of a form of marginalization and more political identity.
Mm-hmm. Okay, good. So about George, please.
Hey, for the person who addressed me the question, well, I couldn't agree more. Portugal is quite a special place. We have very, very good laws indeed, but we have still a long way to go in terms of equality. And if we hear what LGBTQ people say, we are going to be very aware that visibility is the key, is the issue in Portugal. So I invite this person to come over to the faculty. For instance, today we are going to have an afternoon full of events, so it would be a pleasure to see you here. There's not much happening, but so we have to take advantage of the moments when things are in place and happening.
Yeah. Yes, I think this set of events that came from the Faculty of Psychology, they're now contaminating to other faculties too. So we are trying to, but of course the participation of people from this community is so important, because they know better than any of us how and the way to go. And it's really very important for you to contact services and help us organizing what you feel it's really necessary. So, and finally, there's another question. I think there is a lack of papers that refer to LGBTQI+ community and its food habits and food access, more specifically food insecurity and eating disorders behaviors. To what extent are these topics being discussed, researched among the universities? Do you know, can comment on this?
They are in fact food behavior is well, every health behavior. We have to consider that it's not the matter of being an LGBTQ people that puts you at a disadvantage. It's prejudice that puts you at a disadvantage. And of course, there are higher rates of food disorders among LGBTQ+ individuals, but not all LGBTQ+ individuals. It's the LGBTQ+ individuals that are victims of prejudice and discrimination. So they use their food behaviors as a way to cope with this climate, this discrimination. And there are the person who is interested can contact me if they wish to do so, because I am actually supervising a PhD exactly about that. Yeah.
Good. So we are reaching our time. It's now 1:30. Time flies when we are in interesting conversation. I would like you to thank you all for being here and for sharing with us all these different and interesting perspectives, for inspiring us for action, and to face the difficulties and all the problems with a different perspective, with a different hope for the future, with more hope for the future. It is really important for this community to be larger, more visible, and to engage within university in order to help us build a better and more comfortable and more safe environment for everyone, not just for this community, but for everyone. Thank you so much for being here, our panelists, our participants today that came, all of them, almost all of them until the end. So thank you very much. And we end the session like this. So
thank you
so much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.